I'm very honored to be here, and this was, I suppose, the strangest invitation I had in my life. I was indeed here in 2007, and I gave them 2 talks about the topic of the voice, which was the guideline for the Ember Festival that year. And Hüseyin Bahri Alptekin came to both talks, and we had a long conversation after the first talk and in a cafe, and then a shorter one after the second talk. And he was very engaging, very knowledgeable, and extremely interested in the topic of the voice and what it holds, why it's so important, my take on this. And the conversation went widely in all directions, as it would with him. And after that, we exchanged a few emails. He asked me for the text of the lecture I just sent. And then, a month and a half later, I was overwhelmed by the news of his death. I would like today to continue our conversation, as it were. At the time when I was invited here, when I got this invitation, I was actually, oddly by coincidence, working again on the topic of sound, and actually picking up some threads from the conversation we had at that time. It's a very difficult, it's an impossible situation to continue a conversation with a dead friend. And Lacan has this famous saying that the letter always arrives at its destination. And I think it's through us gathered here, remembering him, that this letter which is sent into his absence. I will say one more thing about, 2 more things about Hüseyin Alptekin. One thing was that we immediately discovered that we must have been sitting next to each other on Foucault's lectures in the early 80s in Paris. And indeed he seemed familiar to me. He seemed like someone I have known a long time. And the other thing is, I didn't know much about his work at that time. And I only learned afterwards and was very overwhelmed. And this is a really work which inspires admiration, which is remarkably consistent with this show here, and particularly with the catalogue, which brings together very wonderfully all the traces and various threads he's been working on. Yes, and I'll just finish the sentence that I was saying. This is like sending a letter into the absence of the person who is addressed to, and the letter can arrive at its destination through us here today. It can arrive only through our pursuit in his tracks, by our picking up various things that he left behind. So I will do this continuation of conversation in my own way, which is very different from his. His way was expansive, embracing hybridity and nominalism all the time. My own way is rather the way of minimalistic pursuit, of trying to bring things to a minimal core. And I will try to bring things to a minimal core of this curious object of sound. I will try to do this through one of Kafka's stories, which is called The Burrow. I hope you understand the word. The burrow is the underground cavity, the underground den that some animals build. And this is a story which has a first-person narrator who is the badger, the animal building this underground, complex underground thing. And the first thing to be said is, this is not quite the last story that Kafka wrote, this is one before last. And the last story he wrote is called Josephine the Singer. It's about a singing mouse. And both these last stories have very intensely to do with the question of the sound and the voice. So at the end of his life, on the brink of death, Kafka tried to bring his work to a pinnacle, to the minimal, to some minimal edge, and he did this, curiously, through the question of the voice and the sound. And, well, there is something like a testament in this. And there's some sort of clue, there's some sort of clue to modernity, a clue one has to disentangle. What exactly is at stake? This is a famous story, and I will just give two anecdotal comments. The first one bears on Jacques Lacan, and Lacan never ever mentions Kafka in his published work. I don't know why. But in his unpublished seminars, there's just one seminar in 1962 which he devoted to Kafka, and he spoke only about one story, which is The Burrow. So this is the one. And the other anecdote is Martin Heidegger never ever mentions Kafka in all of his written work. So I once had a conversation with George Agamben, and he told me this story, that as a very young man, he met Heidegger in the late 60s, and he cornered him once at the breakfast table and said, "But why do you never mention Kafka?" And Heidegger was silent for a while, and then he went into a long monologue about a single story, which is, as you can guess, The Burrow. So there is some hidden plot in this. There's some hidden burrow of modern theory in this. At the time, no recorder was turned on. One should wish that it was, but we have no record, no track. This Heidegger's take on Kafka. So this story describes an animal, which is never named in the story, but is taken to be a badger. And this animal goes around in this elaborate and convoluted underground burrow, which is a sort of subterranean castle, and like an underground counterpart to the other Kafka's castle and its labyrinth. This is a stronghold which was very meticulously designed in such a way that it would keep any possible enemies at bay. This took a superb effort of craftsmanship, supported by a spectacular streak of paranoia. In order to make this underground bastion safe, the animal had to carefully examine all possible strategies of all imaginable enemies and devise the ways to counteract them. All possibilities had to be considered and taken into account, but no matter how scrupulous his efforts, no measures seem to be good enough. The more the badger exerts itself, the more there remains to be done. So this paranoia has the structure of a self-fulfilling prophecy. It is a self-propelling, self-engendering, engendering ever more paranoia. The more enemies one imagines, the more enemies there lurk behind the corner. The burrow, to make a connection to Hüseyin's work, is like a bunker, a convoluted and ramified version of a bunker. And Hüseyin Alptekin was very interested in this, in very different contexts. In the context with all these hosts of bunkers in Albania, which can be seen as a mushrooming versions of this burrow. And he was very interested in the paranoia of security. He made a show of this in 2002 in Tirana and then in Kassel, and he made this wonderful slogan, an Albanian bunker for each contemporary art museum. And he eventually made an exhibition called Inner Security in Marburg in 2006, concerned precisely with the problem of what he called bunker aesthetics. So he was intrigued by this, to the point of setting up the Bunker Research Group as one of his major projects. And one could see my concern with Kafka's Burrow now as a sort of continuation of this Bunker Research Group, like a sideways plunge into the bunker aesthetics, which is very much at the core of this story, and which is not unrelated to the nature of modern art. So this burrow is a retreat. It's a secret hideaway, most carefully protected against all outer threats. It is the inside which should be clearly separated from the outside, he presents the problem of a clear division of space, a line of demarcation. And obviously, the biggest and the most immediate problem is the problem of entry and exit, the neuralgic spot of transition between the inside and the outside, which is the vulnerable point. And the first part of the story deals with this at great length. No matter how much the entry is hidden and overlaid by moss, whenever the badger has to come out from this burrow or go back inside, this involves a moment of greatest danger. It requires a series of anguished strategic maneuvers. But the moment of transition is always the moment of exposure to risk, and it cannot be avoided. The first peep outside has to be accomplished by trusting the luck, and when re-entering, one has to examine the surroundings at length to make sure that one is unobserved by the enemy eyes. So, the problem, first there appears the problem of spatial transition between the inside and the outside, as the point of an incalculable risk, the moment of the uncontrollable. But this vulnerable point of entry and exit transition is only a condensation in one point of something which is massively present overall. The burrow in its whole is far from being safe haven. It is at all points a space of exposure. The complex architecture of labyrinth has been entirely dictated by the invisible enemy and its omnipresent invisible threat. Quite literally, the inner safe space of the badger is the space entirely shaped by the other, by the supposition of the external menacing other. It is like the supposition turned into space, the inner dwelling coinciding with the space of the supposed threat of the other. The safer it is, the more it is imbued with the other.